Hello, and welcome to the Wendell Foster March 2022 in service. My name is Wesley Gaynor, and today we'll be discussing harassment and working in an inclusive environment. But before we get started, let's take a minute to remember our mission here at Wendell Foster, along with our vision. Our mission, simply put, is why we exist, and that is to empower people with disabilities to realize their dreams and potential. Our vision here is where we want to be in the future, and that's to be the premier provider of rehabilitative, community-based, and residential services. So we're going to start this in-service by reviewing some defensive driving tips and reminders. Now, defensive driving is about decreasing the likelihood of ending up in an accident. And there are several ways you can engage in this, one of which is scanning the road a block or two ahead of you to make sure no hazards are approaching. Another thing you can do is just get in the habit of regularly scanning your mirrors to see what's going on around you. And you can also make sure to include plenty of space between all the cars that are in front or beside you. And finally, make sure you minimize any distractions in your car, such as talking on cell phones, eating, changing the radio station, and using the apps on your phone itself. Other ways to drive defensively is by being aware of where your blind spots are in your vehicle and where the blind spots are for the vehicles that you are around. That way, when you're driving and you think you might be in the vehicle's blind spot, you can speed up to get out of that blind spot or slow down. What you don't want is for them to not see you and merge into you. Also, when driving during the day, even though it's daylight, you should turn your headlights on to make yourself just a little bit more visible to other people. And let's not forget that a lot of accidents happen in parking lots. So anytime you're in a parking lot and you think you might have to back up, use a spotter. Get somebody outside that vehicle to direct you into your parking spot. And if you're driving in any area where the space is tight or maybe difficult to see, get somebody outside that vehicle to guide you to where you're going. If you don't have a spotter available, you need to be extra aware of where your vehicle is in relation to other people and other hazards. Now let's move on to some of the reminders about safe operations of Wendell Foster vehicles. When using wheelchair lifts and ramps, you want to make sure that they are used only by the service recipient, therefore their use, not for ours. Whenever we hop on there to get into the van or out of the van, we increase the risk of falling, so you don't want to ride on those lifts. When helping somebody on or off a lift, be aware of the toe plates and the back plate. They need to be in the downward position for somebody to enter or exit a ramp. And sometimes you might need to give them a little nudge with your foot to make sure they're firmly seated. And when someone's on the lift, their chairs have to be turned off and their wheels need to be in the locked position. There's a high risk of somebody falling off a lift if we don't take those precautions. And finally, when you're parking somewhere and you're going to be using that lift, make sure you give yourself plenty of space so that when you lower the lift down, you don't hit cars or other objects around you. When using the lift, make sure you turn the vehicle on, keep the parking brake engaged, and turn the switch on for the lift. If you don't secure the doors of the vehicle, you'll run the risk of the wind blowing them into the lift and causing damage. So use the bungee cords that are provided to keep the doors open. Many times people will just attach these to the tire rim and that does a pretty good job. All wheelchairs should be facing forward while they're in the vehicle, and you need to secure them to the floor with 4 tie-down belts. Now typically, wheelchairs are designed to make this easy because they have a bracket that's mounted to the frame and you can just attach the J-hook to the bracket. But sometimes you may find that you can't attach the J-hook to that bracket, so in this case, you can use a webbing loop and attach the J-hook to that webbing loop. Always attach the J-hooks or webbing loop to a non-removable piece of the wheelchair. Failure to do this can cause a wheelchair to break loose during transportation and can hurt somebody. Now, since our passengers rely on us for safety, it's really important that we double check all of our work to make sure that the wheelchair is off, the wheels are locked, and the passenger is comfortable. And while you're at it, go ahead and double check the tie downs to ensure they haven't come loose. Every rider is to use a lap and shoulder belt, so don't rely on the wheelchair's lap belt alone. That's not the same as the ones that are located in the vehicle. and make sure the passenger is comfortable with how everything is situated. So no matter what you do to prevent accidents, there are times in which they do happen. In this case, we want you to stay calm and follow the steps you'll see on the next few slides. When accidents happen, make sure you stop your vehicle either at or near the accident scene in a safe location. And remember to stay on the scene. I really can't emphasize this enough. Leaving the scene of an accident is illegal. You are not to leave until the police tells you that you can. With any accident that you may find yourself in, be sure you call 911 for an ambulance or the police to respond. And check your passengers right away to make sure they're safe and don't need any emergency medical treatment. Provide the dispatcher with the location of the accident, your name, what vehicle you're in, how many passengers you have, and if anybody is injured. And then your next phone call should be to the Director of Transportation. When the police arrive on scene, you want to provide them with all the information they request. So please be polite, be calm throughout this whole interaction, and don't make any statements that might be admitting you are at fault or negligent. Doing so may jeopardize your rights or the rights of your passengers or Wendell Foster. While you're waiting for the police to respond, this is a good time to collect the names, addresses, and phone numbers of everybody that's involved in the accident along with witnesses. Encourage all witnesses to stay there and provide a statement to police when they arrive. So if this is an accident that involves other vehicles and drivers, you're going to want to collect all the information that you see here. And again, you can gather this while you're waiting for the police to arrive. If the other vehicle tries to leave, go ahead and write down what type of car it is and the color of it along with the license plate number. As with any incident, we're going to need for you to write a report of exactly what happened before, during, and after the collision. If you can also include pictures or videos of the vehicles after the collision and maybe even of the roadway, the direction of travel, that would be very handy. Also keep in mind that it is Wendell Foster's policy that if anybody is involved in an accident, they must submit to a drug and alcohol screening. If you're involved in an accident and you don't immediately report this, then this is a serious event, and regardless of how severe the accident is, you can be disciplined up to termination of employment. Another situation you may find yourself in is if you hit an unoccupied parked vehicle or if you damage somebody else's property. So if this happens, you need to stay there and try and locate the owner and contact the police so we can file a report. Under no circumstance should you leave the scene without first calling the police and having them file a report. So once you've returned to the facility following an accident, there's one more thing for you to do, and that's to complete a Wendell Foster Vehicle Accident Report. The Director of Transportation or your supervisor can give you a copy of this. Just make sure you complete this as soon as possible after the accident or at the end of the driver's shift. The following slides are going to show us how to complete this form. So as we can see, this form is really simple to complete. We're just trying to capture the basic information of everybody that's involved. In this example, we can see that the driver is the Muffin Man, and he had an accident that was on March 11th, 2021 at 2:33 p.m. And we even wrote down all of his information, including his address on Drury Lane and his phone number, and even the vehicle number. So a lot of vehicles, such as Wendell Foster's, will actually have a vehicle number on the outside of it for people to see, and we want to capture that information. The next bit of information is the location of the accident itself. And as you see, we're pretty specific here. It's 129th East 18th Street. If you can't provide an exact address, you want to get as close as possible. So you can even name what block of the street is or what the intersection is. Now, next is the part where we want to be very specific in what direction of travel and what the driving conditions were during this incident for all vehicles involved. As we see with vehicle 1, they were traveling east, and the road conditions was dry pavement, low traffic. It was a sunny day. They're going about 25 miles per hour. And we have similar information here for vehicle 2. Now, there's another person who's involved in this accident, and that is vehicle owner number 2. And in this case, it's Pillsbury Doughboy. And we have their phone number, their address, which is Mallard Creek Drive, here in Owensboro. And we even have the make, year, and model of their vehicle, which is a 2007 Ford Focus. We've got their license plate, which is Doughboy, and even have the information for their insurance company. That's very important that we capture this. Again, this information is all about the person that the accident was involved with. So there's the primary and the secondary. So this is page 2 of this same report. Now on this section, notice we're collecting information on witnesses and people that were actually involved or injured, along with the actual description of what happened. So here we're talking about witnesses, and we have one whose name is Billy Bob Thornton. He lives on Hillbilly Lane, and we have his phone number. Now this is a section for personal injuries. We have Muffin Man on Drury Lane, and we have a description of the actual vehicle accident. So this is what actually happened. You want to be very specific here. It says Muffin Man was driving east on 18th Street at the address of, or near the address of 129, when Pillsbury Doughboy was going in the opposite direction, crossed the center line, and hit the Muffin Man's vehicle. That is what happened. We want to stick to the facts on this. It's really important that we write this down as quickly as possible, because the more time that passes, the more fuzzy our memory gets. So don't waste any time to complete this form. And as you can see, overall, it's fairly simple to complete. In fact, the end of it, you just write down the date and make sure you sign it. So we have one more thing to discuss, and that is fuel cards and documentation. So the fuel cards can be obtained from the business office. So make sure you get these before you go on a trip, because you're going to need to put fuel back in the vehicle. And you're going to need to return these as soon as possible with a receipt for all your purchases. Before leaving your trip, you also need to start documenting on the vehicle log sheet. This will be a documentation of the very basic information of who's driving, the date, the time, all relevant information. You're going to document on this form at the beginning of the trip, when you fuel up your vehicle, and then when you return from a trip. If you don't chart on this form, Wendell Foster cannot prove that the vehicle was used for work-related activities, and that could affect our reimbursement. So please be very diligent about charting on this every single time you use a vehicle. When you pay for fuel at a fuel service station, they might ask for your mileage. Now this is located on the vehicle's dashboard, and they should also ask you for the driver number. This is the 4-digit vehicle number that's located on the outside of the vehicle. So this is an example of the vehicle log and what it looks like. Once these are completed, you want to turn them into the Director of Transportation. And what I mean by this is, once every single line of this form has been completed, there's no room for any more information, you should remove it and give it to the Director of Transportation. And one last thing to talk about is the new vehicle inspection form. This form needs to be completed by all drivers before they use the vehicle. Just refer to the things you're checking and indicate whether or not there's a defect. If there is, to the right under repairs needed, write down what repair is required. Let's not forget to put down the date of the inspection, the vehicle number, the mileage, and who did the inspection. When finished, turn this form into Rick Searcy or Chad Underhill. And now we're going to discuss workplace harassment. So to start with, let's talk about what illegal harassment means. As we see here, illegal harassment is unwelcome conduct that's based on race, color, religion, sex including pregnancy, national origin, age, or being 40 years old or older, disability, or genetic information. Harassment that's based on these criteria are considered illegal when it occurs at work. There are also laws that prevent harassment if it's directed at a person in retaliation for filing a discrimination charge, testifying, or participating in an investigation or lawsuit. The big takeaway from this is that having a workplace that is free from harassment is not just a Wendell Foster policy, it's also the law. Along with what we already discussed, there are other laws that make harassment illegal, such as the Americans with Disabilities Act, and there's also the Equal Pay Act of 1963. And let's not forget the Pregnancy Discrimination Act of 1978. Wendell Foster has a zero tolerance policy for any harassment in the workplace. Our culture is one in which all employees should avoid offensive or inappropriate harassing behaviors while at work. In fact, we believe that all employees have the right to work in an environment where there's no offensive or inappropriate harassing behavior. We believe it's everybody's responsibility to ensure that Wendell Foster is free from harassment at all times. Wendell Foster's policy A-3 is an anti-harassment policy, and it states that as an employee, you're expected to adopt a high standard of conduct every day. Now, this is to ensure that every employee and those that we serve are treated the way each one of us will want to be treated. Now, when talking about harassment, it's important to understand that it becomes illegal when the person has to endure the offensive conduct in order to keep their job. It's also illegal when the conduct is either severe or pervasive enough that it creates a work environment most reasonable people would consider intimidating, hostile, or abusive. So here we have some examples of conduct that may be considered offensive and that can certainly interfere with work performance. So for harassment to be considered illegal, it must be directed at one of the classes that are protected by law, and we can see these classes here. It includes people of any race, color, religion, national origin, age, disability status, genetic information, military status, and gender. A lot of times, there's confusion about workplace harassment and bullying. Bullying is not acceptable here at Wendell Foster, but it is not a type of illegal harassment unless it's directed towards one of the protected classes that we just named. It is understood, though, that both behaviors cause hurt and harm, and it's usually derived from a person's desire to have power and control over somebody else. And here are some examples of workplace bullying. This can include verbal abuse and profanity, gossip, or even aggressive emails or notes. Wendell Foster has zero tolerance for bullying here at work. So if you see something, you need to say something. Another form of illegal harassment is called sexual harassment. Sexual harassment is defined as unwelcome verbal, visual, nonverbal, or physical conduct of a sexual nature, and it's based on someone's sex. It's conduct that's severe or pervasive, and it affects the working conditions or creates a hostile work environment. This is considered a form of illegal sex-based discrimination. So within that definition, there are some key phrases that we need to define. And the first is unwelcome. For sexual harassment to be considered illegal, the person that is directed towards must tell the perpetrator that it's unwelcomed and unwanted. Now, this can be done either verbally, in writing, or through action. But once this has been made known, the conduct is then considered unwanted. Sexual harassment can come in many different forms. It can be verbal, visual, nonverbal, or physical conduct. Now here we can see some examples of both verbal, written, or physical harassment. And again, we must emphasize that for it to be considered illegal, the person that's performing the action must be told to stop and that it's unwelcome. Now, some examples of nonverbal sexual harassment includes staring at a person's body. And an example of visual harassment is the displaying of images of a sexual nature. And now let's look at the terms severe or pervasive. The key word here is or. The action must be severe or pervasive. It doesn't have to be both. So here we see a good example where a single unwanted sexually suggestive comment can offend somebody, and while yes, it's totally inappropriate, it may not be severe or pervasive. That is because pervasive means it happens frequently or persists over a period of time. Multiple minor and separate incidents can all add up to sexual harassment if, when combined, they have a negative impact on the actual work environment. So to determine if the harassing conduct is severe, We should ask ourselves the three questions that we see here. 1. How often did it occur? 2. How long has the conduct been occurring? And 3. Have other people of my same gender been treated similarly? Another key point to remember is that sexual harassment is considered illegal if it affects the working conditions or creates a hostile work environment. So notice the example listed here. The conduct they endured caused their performance to suffer or possibly caused them to decline opportunities such as trainings because it would cause them to be near their harasser. And the legal determination of whether or not an environment is considered hostile is the reasonable person test. If a reasonable person of the same sex facing similar circumstances would be equally uncomfortable, then the environment may be considered hostile. So I think we can all agree that what we see right here are obvious examples of sexual harassment. When it comes to harassment, a lot of times the person accused will say, hey, I didn't mean what I said to be taken that way. But that's not a good excuse. It doesn't matter how the harasser intended a message to be taken. What matters is how the victim perceived the message. So regardless of the person's intent, their behavior will be judged based on the impact of the work environment. There are many types of sexual harassment, but what we see here are the two most common. The first is quid pro quo. And as we can see from the example, the supervisor demands a sexual favor and they'll provide something in return. Again, that is called quid pro quo. The second example is what we've already mentioned before, and this is the hostile work environment. If somebody's behavior is of a sexual nature and creates an offending, intimidating, or hostile work environment for somebody, it is sexual harassment. Other forms of sexual harassment that you may not be aware of includes third party. An example of this is when two people are talking about a topic of a sexual nature and a passerby hears it and is offended by it. There is also the non-employee sexual harassment. This occurs when a person that doesn't work for the employer, such as maybe a vendor, engages in sexually harassing behavior towards an employee. These people will be held to the same legal consequences as the employees are when it comes to sexual harassment. And finally, there is the same-sex sexual harassment. This occurs when a male sexually harasses another male, or a female sexually harasses another female. This is sexual harassment and is not tolerated. What is shown here are some examples of environments that the court may see as hostile. So this could be an environment where there's pornography, sexual touching, sexual jokes, or sexual propositions. Too often, people think that a sexual harasser or illegal harasser fits a certain stereotype, but that's not true. Not every person that's a sexual harasser is creepy looking and drives a plain white panel van. It could be the person's supervisor. It could be a coworker. It could even be the person that's just filling the vending machines. Honestly, a sexual harasser could be anybody. So if you find that you're subject to illegal or sexual harassment, you have a duty to speak up and you need to tell that person to stop. Honestly, some people just don't realize the impact of their words. So speak up and let them know. And then write a statement about the incident, include their name, the name of the witnesses, and give that to Human Resources or your supervisor. And when you write your statement, make sure you include the dates, times, places, witnesses, what was said, and then your response to the incident. And again, this report should be turned in to your supervisor or Human Resources. If you were a witness to the harassment, please support the victim. Now you can do this by telling the offender that their behavior was observed and inappropriate, and then go ahead and write a statement to give your supervisor or Human Resources. We can all keep this place free from harassment by supporting Wendell Foster's policies and initiatives. As a supervisor, you have a duty to take action if you suspect harassment of any form is occurring in the workplace, or if you should have known that it was occurring. You see, this is one of those times in which ignorance is not bliss. In fact, if it's obvious you should have known what was happening, then as a supervisor, you're going to be held accountable. So this means you don't wait for a complaint to be filed. You instead address the issue immediately. When illegal or sexual harassment is reported, it starts a process in human resources that will ensure each and every case is handled consistently and thoroughly. The first step is the reporting process. So this starts an investigation that will begin within 10 working days after the initial report. This investigation can last up to 15 days, but once it's finished, Human Resources will write a report of their findings and recommendations and send it to the CEO. For issues that may require protection from reprisal of reporting an incident of ethical, moral, financial, or legal nature, Wendell Foster has a hotline that can be used. I want to emphasize, though, that this is not for reporting everyday issues, but for issues that may result in reprisal. Examples of circumstances include harassment, discrimination, and improper conduct. Of course, there are other examples beyond these three. Any other issue that doesn't require anonymity should be directed towards the department supervisor. Here's the information for the whistleblower hotline. You can call toll-free, email them, or visit their website. And now for our final topic. This is diversity, inclusion, and respect. Wendell Foster has a proud history of empowering people with disabilities to realize their dreams and potential. We advocate for those we support to not just be in the community, but to be of the community. And it's a noble cause that we should all take pride in. While working toward this goal, please remember that there is no I in Wendell Foster, but there is a W and E. We are Wendell Foster. All of us. Despite our backgrounds and our beliefs or ideas, it's only by respecting each other that we've been able to work together to help those we serve and support. I ask each and every one of you to celebrate our diversity by continuing to treat others how we ourselves would like to be treated. The eyes of the people we serve and support, along with the community, they're watching us. They're watching our every move. We are a shining example to everyone of how people can be supported by many to achieve their goals. We are Wendell Foster. Each day, our interactions with each other serve as an example to those that we support of how they're to be treating other people. We can't expect the people we support to be respected by society if we don't stand together and treat each other with that same respect. So it's today that I ask each and every one of you to be the change that you desire in the world. Be the example of goodness to everybody around you. Be a difference maker. Continue to see beyond our differences and join together as a team so we can show our community who Wendell Foster is.
And so I want to talk to you about what inclusion is, which it is promoting an environment, a climate with people of every background. They feel like not only are they respected, but they are reflected and they're expected. In other words, when you come in the room, people are not assigning you to the corner or asking you for the lunch menu. To be expected is to be presumed to be there because you are the head and you said you were the head, so I'm not sure why you can't understand that I'm the head and why you're asking me to order lunch. So it's a lot about expectations. It's about being reflected in that culture. And it's also about being respected. It's also about being integrated and feeling welcomed. And your voice is being heard and your ideas are being solicited. And you feel like you have an equal opportunity to succeed. That's the whole piece of it. Now, so that's why I say diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusion is being asked to dance. It is a very different level of engagement when people feel, Do we want to go back to middle school? Maybe not. But some of us had a good run. Others of us don't ever want to talk about it. But remember those weird little mixers where you were sort of on the side and like hoping that someone would ask you to dance? It was really awkward. If you were straight in particular, you were like hoping that there would be like these little boys. The boys were shorter in middle school. It was awkward. It was awkward. But it was all about like, am I going to get into the dance? Because I'm here, but I'm on the floor. Am I on the floor? And will I be asked? And you know what? We can make up a lot of things for ourselves. But right now, what we notice is that certain people are the host of these particular environments. And without them actually inviting you on the mainstream. So where is John, the fabulous John? Did he leave? I love the idea that he chose her. And I love the idea that she accepted it. It wasn't all perfect, as the other Geraldine talked about. It wasn't perfect. It was like she didn't even have experience. He's like, you know what? Let's make this work. That's what we mean when we say someone is inviting you to dance. And you don't have to have all the dance steps, as we heard earlier, but you got to actually have the opportunity to show what you're capable of doing. So there are really wonderful ways that inclusion benefits us all and any kind of project and any kind of division and company. However, there are barriers. So I want to talk to you about the barriers. And I want to talk to you about the barriers as women from a point of view of a woman and a woman of color. I have been watching myself trying to move through some of what it means to walk in inclusion. And so I thought I would talk to you about the barriers. One of the barriers is this idea called organizational preference. And believe me, women get caught up in it too. Organizational preference is that a group of people get together and they create something, and they create that something to work for them. And it's not because they're bad people or mean people. It's just that's generally what we do as people. We create something that flows for us. A problem is that when we say we want difference and we invite in different people, many times we're trying to do that but not do anything different. Organizational preference says we're looking for the person who looks most like the people who are already there. We've got a very narrow perspective of what the right person, the right way to talk, the right way to work, the right way to dress. All of that is very precise. And maybe it's not said out loud, but it's in the culture. It's in the water. And this is an idea that Kenji Yoshino from New York Law School is talking about called covering. That often we begin to cover the aspects of ourselves that is different from everyone else who's there, who's in the lead, in order to survive. And what I have seen for women also is sometimes we go way overboard. We're more critical sometimes. We're like, I don't think she's going to make it. Not with that hairstyle. And so we are already like, because we're afraid or we're successful. We're successful in that environment. And so sometimes we're trying to give the best advice, like, honey, I know you want to cry, but we don't cry here. And you're like, okay, do we cry like in our offices? No, we don't cry anywhere. Really? Because that's not what's happening. So there are right? One thing is a strategy, and another thing is actually like you're telling a person that they're not as good or they're doing something weird and strange, and that makes people what? They can survive for a period of time, but it gets exhausting. And when your really fabulous talent people decide they're leaving, you're like, she was so fabulous. Where's she going? You ran her out. So let us think about our own preferences and the ways in which we are thinking about who can do this particular job or who's going to be successful. You know what? I came up when we were wearing those weird little ties too. Is Geraldine still here? We had the button down. It was not pretty. People thought, where's Nithya? I'm looking at Nithya. Thank you so much for having me, Nithya. I really appreciate it. And Catherine also. When I'm looking at you guys, you look fabulous. We couldn't practice law. Like in 1985, they were like, you may not be able to practice law in pants. This is not possible, right? I'm not even lying to you. So we do have some progress that we're seeing things differently, but it is still some stuff that's embedded. Here's the problem. We all are looking at the world through our own particular lens, our own way of shaping and understanding the world, okay? And let me tell on myself, that's me in China. It's my first time. Nobody told me people were going to be staring at me, right? So I was like, no, here, I wish I were to tell you that as a diversity cultural specialist, which I am, I said, oh, what an interesting cultural experience. That's not what I said. What did I say? What's up? Like, why are you staring at me, right? And so, but then I got a hold of myself, and then I went and talked to my cultural informant, who was a Asian guy who had been working there and was from China and worked in the U.S. And I said, are people staring at me? He said, yeah, people are staring at you. I was like, but why are people staring at me? He said, well, they've never seen you before. I mean, never seen a person who looks like you before. And one of the things, I was like, really? And then he said, oh, and by the way, we have no prohibition against staring. I don't know how many of you in the room had the mother that I had, but my mother was very serious about the staring thing. She was like, we do not stare at people. In fact, if someone could be naked walking down the street, and I'd be like, naked? No, we do not. Let me just see. Did anybody have those mothers? Okay, so a few of us. Let me tell you, my mother did such a great job on like just hammering this into my being that I thought it was universal. You got to ask yourself, how many messages did you get growing up from the people you trusted that you think are universal, that everybody should be this way, look this way, act this way, whatever? The other thing I brought to China that was completely wrong and useless was my Black American lens. Okay, so as a Black American, if people are staring at you, it's generally not good. Okay, let me just say, historically, it hasn't been a good thing. So generally, if you're staring at me, it's either like you don't want me, you don't think I should be there, or something's bad's going to go down. After talking to my cultural informant, I went back out the next day. I start waving. What do they do? Yes, they do. And I'm in a bunch of like super random photos with Chinese families. But it was awesome. It was awesome. And it was actually a real lesson for me about how my worldview is not the only view. So this is true about all of us. How are you interpreting? How are you communicating? How are you evaluating talent? Okay, because culture impacts everything. We think we have just like this rational idea about what's happening here and whether that person is confident and whether that person is presenting herself in a way that shows a lot of confidence and all of that. Let me tell you, culture impacts how we communicate. Whether we leave a little space in between what that person just said and what we said. Or whether we stand up and say everything about who we are and what we've done and what our titles are, or whether we're like, yeah, so it would kind of be nice, like maybe, I'm not saying, but I think I know about this. So those things are culturally determined often how we evaluate, how we support performance, who we think is smart, what we think smart looks like, all of that, who we want to be with, who we trust sort of implicitly, how we understand family, what our values are. All of those things are impacting the idea of inclusion. Who we're bringing into our circle, who we're walking toward, who we're giving an extra chance to. The last couple things I want to say is you got to stay on top of your bias. There's no way to do this work now that we have all the research about unconscious bias without being on top of them. So go looking for your biases. Go see who you get excited about without even knowing who they are. Looking at resumes. What do you focus on? And who have you mentored? And are there any patterns? Who do you share information with? And then most importantly, to weaken your biases, you've got to slow down. You've got to slow the judgment down. You've got to actually invite more information and look for the information that doesn't go with what you think about the world already. And then you've got to get uncomfortable, which was already said. Build relationships across different, feel awkward, feel weird, until you move into the comfort and to deeper relationships. And that helps to actually push against the bias. Interrupt bias. Don't let people say things that are crazy. And we have friends, and also it's the holiday. You know, you're sitting at the table with grandma, you're like, grandma's a bigot. You know, I didn't even know. Who knew, right? So you got to start thinking about these things and thinking about who else is at the table. The kids are at the table. And when we wonder why we're not moving and why we have these issues on the street and why even in the C-suite we still aren't moving, it's because we are not proactively anti-bias. You can't be passively anti-bias. You've got to be proactive about it. So I am grateful to have an opportunity to talk to you. I'm going to ask you to move down that spectrum as often as you can. And I'm also going to tell you to take some risk, because that's how we become more inclusive. And as a result, that's how we move women and all folks forward. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Here are some common tips to help us become more inclusive and respectful in our diverse work environment. Now, I love this second to last tip where it says, get to know each other on a personal level. I think too often we forget that the people we work with are people. They have emotions and feelings too. And so I encourage you to get out there and engage people, discover who they are, and in doing so, you'll discover more about yourself. And finally, let's treat everybody fairly and equally despite anything that may seem different to you. If we were all the same, Wendell Foster would not be so unique. So let's celebrate our differences, our diversity, and show the community what happens when people work together in harmony. And now I bring you Wendell Foster updates. The Wendell Foster Golf Scramble is back. Plan for a fun day out on the golf course with us on Friday, September 16th, 2022. Registration begins at 7:30 a.m. with tee-off at 8:15 a.m. and this will be at Ben Hall's golf course. There will be prizes, lunch, and goodie bags included with the team registration. We'll see you there. Join Wendell Foster on Saturday, June 4th at 5:30 p.m. for the 2022 Annual Benefit Dinner and Auction to celebrate 75 years. Enjoy a great evening, including a silent live auction, dinner, and entertainment. Auction items include rare bourbon, curated travel experiences, sports mementos, and tickets to popular attractions. And wait a minute, did I mention there'll be bourbon there? Doors open at 5:30 p.m. with the program beginning at 6 o'clock p.m. For this event, we will need a lot of volunteers, so if you're willing to help us out for this, please don't hesitate to contact Sarah Poole at spoole@wendellfoster.org. On Thursday, July 21st, 2022, from 10:30 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m., Wendell Foster will be hosting the First Responders Barbecue. That's on this day that Wendell Foster recognizes the Owensboro and Davis County first responders. So please join us for this event so we can all thank them for the work they do for Wendell Foster in our community. This is for local and active first responders. Lunch is on us in the Wendell Foster Century Park. And that concludes the 2021